The alien queen married her powerless daughter to a human man, and years later the queen regretted the galaxy had never seen a union quite like the one forged between Princess Solara, the daughter of the powerful alien queen, and James, a human man. It was a marriage that sparked many questions in the minds of those who witnessed it, for humans were considered weak and powerless by the advanced alien races that ruled the stars. Yet it was precisely that powerlessness that had led the queen to make such an extraordinary decision. Solara, the only daughter of the alien queen, had been born different from the other members of her species. Unlike her fellow aliens, who were gifted with incredible abilities, telepathy, superhuman strength, and advanced technology, Solara had nothing of the sort. She was ordinary, or so it seemed. Her appearance was regal, graceful even, but beneath that exterior lay a deep insecurity. While other members of her species held extraordinary powers, Solara felt that she lacked what was necessary to lead her people. She was considered weak, unfit for the throne, and the queen, her mother, feared that Solara would never rise to the expectations placed upon her. In a desperate attempt to secure Solara's future and the future of her people, the queen decided that the only solution was to marry her daughter off to a human. James, a soldier who had once shown great courage during a diplomatic mission to the human homeworld, was chosen. He was strong in spirit, resourceful, and brave, even if he lacked the power that was so highly valued in the alien world. The queen saw in him a certain quality that she believed might make up for her daughter's perceived deficiencies. She saw James as a symbol of change, a being from a species so vastly different from their own, yet capable of standing firm in the face of adversity. But most importantly, James was a man who could provide the one thing Solara lacked: stability. When Solara learned of her mother's decision, she was shocked, angry, and confused. She had always been made to feel that her worth was tied to her abilities, that only those who had power and strength could succeed. She had never expected to be married off to a human, let alone to someone from a species so often viewed as inferior by her people. But her mother's decision was final. Solara's destiny had been shaped without her input. The queen explained that the marriage was not just a political move, but a necessity for the survival of their world. A union with a human could open new doors, diplomatic ties, resources, and most importantly, a chance to restore peace among the factions of the galaxy. If Solara didn't comply, she would be left with nothing, and her people would suffer the consequences. Thus, Solara found herself standing at the altar, staring at a man she had never met before. James was no stranger to his own doubts and fears. Raised on Earth, he had always been taught that love was a choice, something that grew over time, not a decision made for the sake of political alliances. But he had never been faced with a choice like this. He knew the marriage would be difficult, that Solara was a stranger to him in every way. But he also knew that his duty to protect her and their people was a responsibility he could not ignore. Their first meeting was awkward. Solara was cold, distant, and utterly uncomfortable with the situation. She did not want to be here, and she certainly did not want to be married to someone from a race she had always considered beneath her own. James, on the other hand, tried to keep his distance, not wanting to overstep. He was a man of action, not words, and he knew that his new wife was already burdened with the weight of her mother's decision. It was hard to find common ground, and even harder to form a connection with someone who seemed so different, so far removed from the world he had known. But in the years that followed, things began to change. Slowly, Solara started to open up to James. There was something about his simple, unpretentious way of life that caught her attention. He had no special powers, no superhuman abilities, yet he managed to live a full, meaningful life. He worked hard, showed kindness to everyone he met, and most importantly, he was steadfast in his loyalty. Unlike the people of her world, who were obsessed with power and status, James was grounded in a way that Solara had never experienced before. She found herself drawn to him in ways she couldn't explain. They began to talk more, and as they did, Solara started to realize that James was not like the others. He did not judge her for her lack of power. In fact, he often told her that her worth was not defined by the abilities she had, but by the choices she made and the strength she showed in overcoming the challenges in her life. For the first time, Solara felt as though she mattered not for what she could do, but for who she was. James saw the real her, not the princess, not the daughter of the queen, but the woman who had struggled to find her place in a world that valued strength above all else. It was during one of their conversations that Solara realized something that changed everything. She had been so focused on her own weakness, on what she lacked, that she had never truly seen the strength in herself. James had taught her to see beyond the surface, to find power not in the extraordinary, but in the simple things, like resilience, compassion, and the ability to love without fear. She began to see James not as the inferior human she had once thought of him as, but as someone who possessed the very qualities she had been missing. Through him, Solara started to understand that power did not always have to come from extraordinary abilities. Sometimes it came from within. As the years went by, Solara's feelings for James deepened. She realized that the marriage she had once resented had given her something she had never known before, a sense of purpose, a sense of self-worth. She had become more than just a princess. She had become a woman who could stand on her own, who could face the challenges ahead with strength and determination. And it was all thanks to the man she had once thought of as beneath her. James had shown her that there was more to life than power, and that true strength came from the heart, not from the abilities one was born with. But despite their growing bond, Solara still couldn't shake the feeling that she was not truly welcome in either world. She had been married to a human, yet her people still saw her as weak. James, for all his kindness and love, was still a foreigner to her people, someone who would never be accepted as an equal. As much as she had grown to love him, Solara knew that there would always be a part of her that felt torn between her heritage and the life she had built with James. She was an outsider in both worlds, a queen without a throne, a woman without a place. And so, as Solara looked at James from across the room that evening, she couldn't help but wonder if her mother's decision had truly been the right one. The queen had hoped that this marriage would help her daughter find strength, but Solara had found something even more important, something that neither power nor politics could ever provide: love, acceptance, and the belief that even the weakest among them could find their own place in the universe. The journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in her life, Solara felt ready to face it, by James' side. Years had passed since Princess Solara's marriage to James, the human man she had once resented. Their life together had been a journey of challenges, but also of growth. It wasn't the life Solara had once imagined, but it was a life that she had come to value. What had started as a political arrangement had slowly transformed into something deeper, more meaningful. Yet, even as she found herself beginning to love James in a way she never thought possible, a sense of unease lingered within her heart. There were still many questions about her place in both the human world and her own. Solara had always been a part of something much larger. She had been raised to rule, to lead her people. But here, with James, she had no throne to claim, no crown to wear. She was just Solara, a woman, not the powerful princess her people expected her to be. The expectations of her mother, the queen, still loomed large. Her mother's vision for her had been clear from the beginning: marry a human man, gain the strength she lacked, and bring a new alliance to their people. But Solara wasn't sure she had ever fully understood what that meant. James, however, was not like the men Solara had known. He was not interested in power or titles. He had no interest in ruling or conquering. James simply wanted to live his life with integrity and kindness. He had never seen Solara as a princess. To him, she was simply Solara, his wife, his partner, his equal. This view was both refreshing and unsettling for Solara. She had spent her entire life being told that power was everything, that strength defined her worth. But James had no such belief. His strength came from his heart, from his ability to love, to stay true to his values, and to stand by her no matter what. Solara's inner conflict grew as she realized that she had changed in ways she hadn't expected. She found herself questioning the values her mother had instilled in her. Growing up, Solara had been taught that power was the ultimate goal. She had been prepared to rule, to command respect, to be feared by her enemies. But now, living with James, she was learning that perhaps power wasn't the answer to everything. There were other ways to lead, ways that didn't require fear, domination, or strength beyond measure. There were ways to lead with love, compassion, and humility. But those thoughts didn't come easily to her. Every time Solara returned to her home world, she felt the weight of expectations pressed down upon her. The courtiers, the advisors, the generals, everyone looked at her as if she were the future of their galaxy, the future of their entire race. They wanted her to be the shining example of power, grace, and strength. They saw her marriage to James as a means to an end, a political strategy to unite the alien race with humanity. But Solara couldn't shake the feeling that they saw her as nothing more than a tool, a pawn in a larger game. It was during one of these visits to the homeworld that Solara's doubts reached their peak. The Queen had summoned her for another diplomatic summit, one that would involve leaders from across the galaxy. This was no ordinary summit. It was an event that could shape the future of her people, the future of the entire galaxy. Solara was expected to take her place at the Queen's side, to participate in the discussions, to represent the alien race and its interests. But as she prepared for the event, she found herself questioning everything she had ever been taught. Could she really live up to these expectations? Could she truly serve as a leader in a galaxy that valued power above all else? James, ever the support, stood by her side. He knew the weight she carried, the pressure she felt to be something she was. He had always seen the strength in her, even if she didn't recognize it herself. While Solara struggled with her own sense of identity, James remained steadfast in his belief in her. To him, she was everything. He didn't need her to be a ruler. He didn't need her to be someone she was. He loved her for who she was, not for the title she held or the expectations placed upon her. His unwavering support gave her strength, and slowly Solara began to see herself through his eyes. The summit was a grand affair. Leaders from different star systems had gathered in a massive chamber, each one eager to present their ideas, their demands, their visions for the future. The Queen, as always, commanded the room with her presence. Her voice was authoritative, her words precise, and her gaze could make even the most powerful leaders quake in their boots. Solara sat beside her mother, watching as the discussions unfolded. She had attended many such meetings before, but this time felt different. For the first time, Solara felt like an outsider in a world that should have been hers. The discussions were heated, as expected. Each faction had their own agenda, their own interests to protect. But it was clear to Solara that the galaxy was changing. The old ways of thinking, the old rules that had governed their world for centuries, were no longer enough. There was a shift in the air, a sense that new ideas were needed, fresh perspectives, new alliances. As Solara watched the leaders argue, she realized that her mother's vision of power and control might no longer be the best path forward. Maybe the galaxy didn't need a ruler who would command obedience. Maybe it needed a leader who could bring people together, who could create unity through understanding rather than domination. But those thoughts were interrupted when the Queen, noticing Solara's distraction, turned to her. "You've been quiet," the Queen said, her voice sharp, her tone laced with expectation. "Do you have nothing to contribute?" The words stung, but Solara didn't let it show. She had long ago learned to hide her emotions, to present a face of calm even when her insides were torn apart. But this time, she couldn't help herself. For the first time in her life, she spoke up. "Perhaps," she began, her voice steady but filled with a newfound confidence, "it's time for a different approach. Power alone cannot hold the galaxy together. Unity, trust, and cooperation are what will shape the future. It's time we acknowledge that." The room fell silent and the Queen's gaze hardened. The other leaders looked at Solara, their faces a mix of confusion and disbelief. It was not like Solara to speak out, to challenge the established order. But something had changed in her. She was no longer the scared, powerless princess who had been forced into a marriage she didn't want. She was a woman who had learned that there was more to strength than power. And for the first time, she felt that she had something important to offer the galaxy. James, sitting quietly beside her, gave her a small, approving nod. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything to Solara. She had found her voice, and she had found the strength to speak her truth. The road ahead would be difficult, and the consequences of her words might be far-reaching. But she was ready to face whatever came next. No longer would she be defined by her mother's expectations or by the role that had been imposed upon her. She would define herself, and she would do so with the love and support of the man who had shown her what true strength really was. As the summit continued, Solara's words hung in the air, a challenge to the old ways. The leaders of the galaxy listened, and though they did not all agree with her, something had shifted. The galaxy was changing, and Solara, the once powerless princess, had become part of that change. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Solara felt that she had the power to shape it. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be many challenges to face, many obstacles to overcome. But Solara knew that with James by her side, and with the newfound strength she had discovered within herself, she was ready to face whatever came her way. Together, they would fight for a future where power was no longer the only measure of strength, and where love, unity, and understanding could change the galaxy forever. As Solara stood in front of the Grand Hall, she felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The Grand Summit had ended, and the galaxy was now watching her closely. There was no turning back from the words she had spoken. Her mother, the Queen, had been furious, but Solara had spoken from her heart. She had finally stood up for what she believed in. The galaxy was changing, and Solara was determined to be a part of that change, no matter the cost. The journey home was quiet. James, her husband, sat beside her, sensing the turmoil within her. He had always been a silent support, always there when she needed him, yet never pushing when she needed space. This time, as the ship glided through the stars, he reached for her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything to Solara. She didn't need grand speeches or elaborate promises from him. She only needed his presence, his quiet strength, and the love he gave her without question. They didn't need the power that so many of their people sought. Together, they had something more important, each other. As the ship docked on her homeworld, Solara's mind raced with thoughts of the future. What had she started? What consequences would her words bring? Her mother had already made it clear how displeased she was with her stance, and the other leaders of the galaxy weren't likely to be any more welcoming. The old ways of power and control had held the galaxy together for centuries, but now Solara had thrown a wrench into that system. She had dared to challenge the notion that strength came only from power and control. She had proposed a new way, one that might take years, even generations, to build. As they stepped out of the ship and onto the landing platform, Solara was greeted by her mother's advisors, who stood in tight formation. They were all there, waiting to see what Solara would do next. Would she stand by her mother's side, or would she continue down the path of rebellion that she had started? The tension was thick in the air, and Solara could almost feel the eyes of the galaxy on her. Her mother was waiting for her, standing tall and regal in front of the grand palace. The Queen's expression was stern, her eyes narrowed. She had not spoken to Solara since the summit, and there was an icy silence between them. Solara knew that the Queen was angry, but she also knew that this was more than anger. It was disappointment. The Queen had raised her to rule, to be strong and powerful, and now Solara was questioning everything she had been taught. It was not just the Queen's power at stake, it was her entire legacy. "Solara," the Queen said, her voice calm but filled with authority, "you've made your position clear, but you must understand that your actions have consequences. The galaxy is not ready for your ideas. People will not listen to the weak. They never have, and they never will." Solara felt a sharp pang in her chest at her mother's words, but she did not back down. "Maybe," she replied, her voice steady, "but maybe it's time for the galaxy to change. Maybe we've been doing things the wrong way all along. Power isn't the only thing that matters. Compassion, understanding, unity, those are things that can change the world too." The Queen's face softened for just a moment, and Solara could see the hint of a sigh escaping her mother's lips. The Queen had spent so many years building her empire, shaping the galaxy with her strength. She had never stopped to consider the cost of that strength, the lives it had affected, the alienation it had caused. Solara had been raised in that world, and she had seen the flaws in it. But her mother had never seen them, or perhaps she had never been willing to acknowledge them. "You speak of unity," the Queen said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of many years of experience. "But unity comes at a price that you are not ready to pay. The galaxy cannot be united with soft words and kindness alone. It needs strength. It needs power. And you, Solara, have been given the power to lead. You should not squander it." Solara's heart ached as she looked at her mother. She had been raised to believe that power was the answer to everything. The Queen had always been a symbol of strength, of control. But now, Solara understood something her mother had not. Power without compassion only creates division. Strength without understanding only leads to suffering, and Solara could no longer accept a world built on those principles. "Maybe I'm not ready," Solara replied softly, "but I am ready to try. I can't sit by and watch while we continue to tear each other apart over who is stronger. That's not the world I want to live in, and it's not the world I want for our people." There was a long silence, and for a moment the queen said nothing. Solara stood tall, meeting her mother's gaze, feeling the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She knew that her path would not be easy. She knew that the road ahead was full of obstacles and challenges, some of which might be insurmountable. But she was ready to face them. She had made her choice, and she was no longer afraid of the consequences. "I have made my decision," Solara said, her voice firm. "I won't go back. I won't live in fear of power any longer. The galaxy needs a new way, and I will help bring it." Her mother's eyes narrowed, but there was a hint of something else there too, a recognition, perhaps, or even a glimmer of respect. The queen said nothing more, but Solara could feel the shift in the air. The battle for the future had begun, and Solara was no longer just the queen's daughter. She was her own person with her own beliefs and her own vision for the future. The following days were filled with tension. Solara's decision had sparked a wave of reactions across the galaxy. Some supported her, seeing her as a beacon of hope and change. Others were less enthusiastic, seeing her as a threat to the established order. The queen had called for a council meeting, one that would decide the fate of Solara's rebellion. The galaxy's leaders would gather once more, and this time, Solara would be forced to stand in front of them and defend her beliefs. James stood beside her, as always, offering his quiet support. He had never wanted any of this. He had never asked to be a part of the galaxy's politics, but he had come to understand the importance of Solara's mission. He believed in her, and he believed that she was the one who could change the galaxy. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would fight for a future where power was no longer the ultimate measure of strength. As the council meeting began, Solara stood before the galaxy's leaders, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the odds were against her. She knew that her mother's influence still held great power. But she also knew that she had something they didn't. Her vision for a new world, a new future, where compassion and unity would guide the galaxy, not power and domination. The battle for the future was just beginning, and Solara was ready to lead the charge. The council meeting that Solara had dreaded was finally here. She stood before the leaders of the galaxy, a gathering of beings far more powerful than she had ever imagined. This was her moment, but it didn't feel like it. Her heart was heavy with the weight of responsibility, but her conviction was stronger than ever. She had already made her choice, and there was no turning back. The room was vast, with towering columns and high ceilings that seemed to echo with the power of centuries. The leaders of the various factions sat in their seats, waiting for Solara to speak. There was a buzz in the air, an undercurrent of tension, as they all wondered what kind of leader Solara would be. She was the daughter of the queen, but her decisions had shaken everything they thought they knew about her. What did a powerless princess know of ruling? What did she know of the struggles that came with wielding true power? Solara's gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of the most influential people in the galaxy. Her mother, the queen, sat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. The queen had been silent since their last conversation, and Solara could feel the eyes of the entire galaxy on her. The stakes had never been higher. This was no longer just a matter of her mother's power. It was about the future of the entire galaxy. The queen had always believed that power was the answer to every problem. Strength, control, and domination had been the foundations upon which the galaxy had been built. But Solara had rejected that notion. She had seen the flaws in the system, the divisions it had created, the suffering it had caused. The galaxy needed something new, something that transcended power. It needed unity, understanding, and compassion. But could she convince the leaders of the galaxy that her vision was the right one? The room fell silent as Solara took her place at the podium. Her heart raced, but she stood tall, determined to speak her truth. She had spent years hiding behind her mother's shadow, living up to expectations that were not her own. But today, she would not be silent. Today, she would show them all that there was more to leadership than power. "I stand before you not as a princess or a queen," Solara began, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "I stand before you as a woman who believes that the future of our galaxy must be built on something more than strength. The future must be built on understanding, on compassion, on the belief that we are all more than the powers we wield." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment there was only silence. The leaders of the galaxy exchanged glances, some skeptical, others intrigued. This was not what they had expected. They had come to hear about strategies for war, for dominance, for securing their hold on the galaxy. They had come to hear about power. But Celera was offering them something different. She was offering them a vision of a galaxy where strength was not measured by the ability to conquer, but by the ability to unite. A galaxy where the differences between races, between species, were not something to be feared, but something to be celebrated. "We have lived for so long in the shadow of power," Celera continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But power alone has not brought us peace. It has not brought us unity. It has only created divisions, fueled wars, and left us divided. We need a new way. A way that brings us together, that allows us to understand each other and work together, not as rulers and subjects, but as equals." The leaders of the galaxy shifted in their seats, some shaking their heads, others considering her words carefully. Celera knew that her message was not an easy one to hear. For centuries, the galaxy had been built on the foundations of power. To challenge that was to challenge everything they had known. But Celera also knew that change was never easy. It was messy, uncomfortable, and often met with resistance. But it was also necessary, and she was ready to fight for it. "The galaxy needs a new kind of leadership," Celera said, her eyes scanning the room. "One that values every voice, every life, no matter the strength or power they possess. We cannot continue down the path of destruction. We cannot continue to measure our worth by the power we have. We must look beyond that. We must look to the future, and in that future there is room for everyone." There was a long silence, and Celera's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had spoken her truth, but now the galaxy's leaders would decide whether they were ready to listen. They could reject her, cling to the old ways, and continue down the path of power. Or they could listen, and together they could begin the difficult but necessary work of building something new. The Queen had remained silent throughout Celera's speech, but now she stood, her regal presence filling the room. She was every inch the powerful ruler, and her eyes locked onto Celera's with a sharp intensity. For a moment, it seemed as though the Queen might dismiss her daughter's words, but instead, she took a deep breath and addressed the council. "Celera has spoken of unity," the Queen said, her voice calm but filled with authority. "She has spoken of compassion. But I ask you all, can we truly afford to live in a galaxy where power is no longer the ultimate measure of strength? Can we allow ourselves to be led by weakness, by sentiment? This galaxy has thrived because of power, because of control. To abandon that would be to abandon everything we've fought for." Her words were met with murmurs of agreement from some of the leaders, but others remained silent, unsure of where they stood. Celera could feel the tension in the room, the divide between those who clung to the old ways and those who were willing to consider something different. The Queen had spoken with authority, as always, but Celera had spoken with something else: hope. And that hope, no matter how small, had begun to take root in the hearts of those who were willing to listen. "The galaxy needs more than power," Celera replied, her voice unwavering. "It needs hope. It needs to believe that there is a way forward, a way that is not defined by strength, but by the strength to be kind, to work together, to build a future for everyone. The future is not about domination. It is about cooperation. It is about finding common ground, even in our differences." The Queen looked at her daughter for a long moment, her eyes filled with something Celera couldn't quite place. Was it pride? Was it regret? Perhaps both. Finally, the Queen spoke again. "I have always believed that strength was the only path to survival," the Queen said, her voice softer now, but still filled with authority. "But perhaps, Celera, you are right. Perhaps there is more to strength than I ever understood. Perhaps there is more to leadership than power." It was the first time the Queen had ever shown such vulnerability, and Celera could see the cracks forming in the foundation of her mother's beliefs. The Queen was not giving up her power, not yet, but she was beginning to understand that there was a new way forward, one that did not depend solely on strength. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. And with that, the council was adjourned. The road ahead would not be easy. The galaxy's leaders were divided, and the Queen's influence still held great power. But Celera had made her case, and in that moment she knew that she had sparked something. The idea of a new future had been planted, and it would not be easily forgotten. The battle for the future of the galaxy was far from over, but Celera was no longer afraid. She had found her voice, and now she would fight for the future she believed in. As the meeting ended and the leaders filed out of the room, Solara turned to James, who had been by her side through it all. He smiled at her, a quiet, knowing smile, and she felt a sense of peace wash over her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Solara felt ready to face it. The days following the council meeting were filled with uncertainty. Solara could feel the weight of the decision she had made pressing down on her. The galaxy's future was at a crossroads, and she had set the course toward something new, something untested. But the road ahead was not clear. There were still those who clung to the old ways, who saw her ideas as nothing more than naive dreams. The Queen's influence was still strong, and the Council's decision, though seemingly a small shift, was only the beginning of what would be a long and difficult journey. Solara knew that she could not afford to wait for things to change on their own. If she wanted to create a new future, she would have to fight for it. And fighting would mean facing opposition, both from within her own people and from the galaxy's other leaders, who were not ready to abandon their thirst for power. It was a battle that would take everything she had, and more. James, as always, stood by her side. He had never wavered in his support, never questioned her decisions. His belief in her, even when she had doubts, gave her the strength to continue. They had both come a long way from the awkward beginning of their marriage, and now, Solara realized, she depended on him as much as he depended on her. Their bond had grown deeper, more meaningful, as they worked together toward a common goal. The world around them may have been in turmoil, but together they were building something new, a foundation for a future that would not be defined by power alone. It was late one evening, after a long day of discussions with the galaxy's leaders, that Solara found herself alone in her chambers. The stars outside her window glowed softly, casting a peaceful light over the room. Yet in her heart there was no peace. There were still so many things left undone, so many obstacles to overcome. The Queen, though she had shown a moment of understanding at the council, had not yet fully accepted the changes Solara was advocating. She still saw strength as the only solution, and that view had not yet softened. Solara knew her mother, knew that she would never fully relinquish her desire for control. But Solara was no longer the scared princess she had once been. She had grown in ways she had never imagined, and with each challenge, she had learned to trust in herself more. She had learned that true leadership wasn't about power or dominance. It was about understanding, empathy, and finding ways to connect with others. It was about believing that a better future was possible, even when it seemed out of reach. James entered the room quietly, his presence calming as always. He could see the tension in Solara's posture, the way her shoulders were hunched, as if she were carrying the weight of the galaxy on her back. Without a word, he crossed the room and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. She looked up at him, and for a moment the world outside seemed to fade away. In his eyes, she saw the same unwavering support that had carried her through so many difficult moments. He wasn't just her husband, he was her equal, her partner, the one who had always believed in her when the world doubted. "You're doing the right thing," James said softly, as if reading her mind. "You're making a difference. It's not going to be easy, but you knew that from the beginning." Solara nodded, though she felt a deep ache in her chest. "I know, but sometimes I wonder if I'm ready. The galaxy is full of people who don't want change. They want power, and power is all they've ever known. How do we change that? How do we make them see that there's another way?" James sat down beside her, taking her hand in his. "You can't change everyone. Some will fight against it, some will resist. But you don't have to do this alone. You have people who believe in you. And I believe in you. Together we'll show them that there's a way forward, a way where power isn't the answer." Solara sighed, leaning into his touch. It was comforting to hear him speak with such conviction, but the weight of the task ahead still felt heavy. She had spoken of unity, of compassion, but the reality of that vision was so much harder to achieve than she had ever imagined. There were so many people in the galaxy who had built their lives around power, around control. They would not give it up easily. And the Queen, who had spent her entire life shaping the galaxy in her image, was not going to let go of her vision without a fight. "We have to keep going," Solara said, lifting her head and meeting James' gaze. "No matter what, even if it's hard, even if we face resistance. We can't give up. This is bigger than us. This is about the future." James smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "And I'll be with you every step of the way. Together we'll make sure that the future is one where kindness and unity win out over power and division." Solara felt a spark of hope deep within her heart. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she believed that it could be different. She had come so far, and with James by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The path would not be easy, but she had learned something important on this journey. True strength didn't come from power or fear. It came from within. It came from love, from the courage to stand up for what was right, even when the odds were against you. The next day, Solara and James stood together before the council once more. The room was filled with the leaders of the galaxy, some of whom still looked at her with skepticism, others with open curiosity. The queen was present, her expression hard, but there was something different about her today. She was not as rigid, not as unyielding as she had been in the past. Perhaps, Solara thought, the seed of change was finally beginning to take root. The discussion was heated as always. The council members debated fiercely, each one defending their own interests, their own vision for the galaxy. But this time, Solara felt something different in the air. There was a shift, a sense of possibility. The leaders of the galaxy were listening, even if they were not yet fully ready to embrace her vision. They were hearing her words, considering her ideas, and that in itself was progress. When the queen finally spoke, her voice was not as forceful as it had been before. "Perhaps," she began, her eyes meeting Solara's, "there is merit in what you say. Perhaps the galaxy does need something different. Perhaps the future cannot be built on power alone." It was a small admission, but it was the beginning of something. Solara knew that the queen would not change overnight, but this was a step in the right direction. The galaxy's future was no longer a certainty. It was something that could be shaped, something that could be fought for. The council meeting ended with no clear resolution, but Solara felt a sense of relief. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, she believed that they could win it. The road ahead would be long, but she was no longer afraid. She had the support of James, and she had the conviction to see her vision through. Together, they would fight for a future where power was not the answer, where compassion and unity could triumph over fear and division.